you all very much. It's really a pleasure to be here with you guys, and really, it's such an honor and pleasure to be presenting Scott to all of you. I grew up with these movies, and they meant something to me then, and now they really mean something to me because I'm working with somebody who basically was a big part of the process of making them happen. So it's really an honor to be here. And I'd also just like to say that this is a collaboration of the Ridgewood Arts Council, of the Ridgewood Guild, and of the production I'm doing that we're here tonight, and that's a very special thing. What we want to do is make Ridgewood a vibrant place to live in and to have a vibrant arts center. And so making a film here, bringing somebody like Scott in to help me and to make a film where we're going to be shooting primarily in Ridgewood is a very special thing. So come on over, Scott. This is okay? Yeah. All right, everybody can see us? Okay. So I just want to talk very briefly about, so Scott and I met, I think it was August. And the first thing we found out was that we have in common is we both went to NYU. Then the second thing I learned is that, believe it or not, Scott Rosenfelt was in Saturday Night Fever. You want to tell them about that?
My secret. First of all, there is one thing I did want to say. In looking at the reel, in the Mystic Pizza clip, did everybody notice in the dinner scene, there was a young kid sitting at the table who's Matt Damon, 15 years old. We'll come back to that, but Saturday Night Fever, after graduating from NYU, I went and worked in a couple productions in New York as a PA, and one of them was Saturday Night Fever. It was the summer of April, May, June of 1977, and we were shooting out in Bay Ridge in Brooklyn, and I was standing on the set near the end of the shoot, and the director was huddling with a couple of the people working on the movie, a producer and a production manager, and they were all talking to each other in a really serious way. And at the time, I was a PA, so I didn't really know too much of what they would have been talking about. And what they were discussing was that John Travolta the night before had flown back to LA and hadn't told anybody. And later on, being a producer, and realizing that happened, I thought, I can't believe I would have never, ever been in that situation as a producer on any movie I did. The idea that they're all huddling because he was gone. He was just gone. He was back to LA because he had to work on his TV show, Welcome Back, Kotter. So they were still shooting that had to be done around Brooklyn. Mostly secondary stuff, not speaking stuff, but they wanted it to be him. It was him in the car and getting out of the car and walking up to the disco and all kinds of stuff. So they're all standing there talking to each other, and I was about 20 feet away with a few people working on the film. And the director, named John Badham, turned and looked at me, and he looked at me, and my hair was a little different back then. And he went like this. And I turned around, and he said, "Where?" I walked over to him. He had John's black leather jacket. He threw it to me. He said, "Put this on." So I put it on. He said, "Turn around." I turned around, and like I said, my hair was actually kind of combed in that style, kind of back. And he said, "Okay, you're going to do it." So for 2 days, I was John Travolta. Everything, sitting riding shotgun in the car, getting out of the car, walking into the disco.
That's him.
It's me. And also a whole bunch of stuff, stunt stuff too. It was like stuff you're not supposed to do. Like we had a stunt driver, and they said, "Oh, you just sit in the car with the stunt driver." Like, again, making movies myself, I'd never, I'd never put a PA in a stunt car with a stunt driver. They were like, it's okay, he knows what he's doing. So all the stuff driving off the Brooklyn Bridge and two wheels on, off exits and things, I'm sitting there with the stunt driver going, are you sure this is okay? And it's all me. So later on, about 5 years later, there was a time when I had a project, and this during, maybe a little longer, maybe about 7 years later. John Travolta was in his period where nobody wanted to hire him. It was about a year before Pulp Fiction. And I had a project at a studio, and it was perfect for John. Absolutely perfect. We had a director, we had a great script, we went to John, he wanted to do it. And we had this meeting, and ultimately the studio, in their infinite wisdom, decided his career was over and didn't do the movie. But we had this meeting, and we started talking, he started talking, and I said, just a minute. I said, before we talk about this movie, I got to tell you something. And I told him the whole story about being him. And it was really a lot of fun at the time. So, yeah, that was my story.
So segueing to Teen Wolf, and all I can say is, I sure hope that none of this kind of stuff happens when we're shooting in summer. But segueing to Teen Wolf, you had a similar issue with Michael J. Fox, or at least halfway through the production. You want to talk about that?
Sure.
Sure.
Michael had been doing, my God, what was the name of the TV show? Family Ties, right?
Family Ties.
Yeah. So, he had done a couple small roles in movies, but Teen Wolf was his first starring role. And so we started shooting the movie, and it was, late spring, early summer. And we were shooting in South Pasadena, and we were trying to make it look like the Midwest, which we kind of did. In South Pasadena, there's a lot of older craftsman homes, and kind of made it look like it wasn't Los Angeles. About 5 blocks away, doing the exact same thing, was Back to the Future. The only difference was Eric Stoltz was the star of the movie. Pretty good actor, but it wasn't Michael J. Fox. And they were shooting 5 blocks away, doing the same thing, shooting, whatever, I forget the name of the town in Back to the Future, but it was obviously not Los Angeles. And after about 2-3 weeks of shooting, Michael came to the set one day and said, guys, I got to talk to you about something. I think I'm going to get cast in Back to the Future. We were like, well, they're shooting. What do you mean? He said, well, they're not really happy with Eric Stoltz. They're going to start over, throw out all the footage, and they want me to star in the movie. Do you think there's any way I can shoot both movies at the same time? It's like, what do you mean shoot both movies at the same time? And we thought about it, and what we ended up doing was we shot a normal day schedule, but tried to get Michael out like at 3 o'clock in the afternoon instead of like 6 o'clock, and he would literally run down the street, go to the other set, and shoot from like 5 o'clock to like 11 o'clock at night, do Teen Wolf the next day, and it kept, for about there was about an overlap of about 3 weeks, and then he was all theirs. And he ended up doing both movies, and then we decided to hold off releasing Teen Wolf. We were finished before they were, but we held off the release of the movie until Back to the Future came out first, and we released our film afterwards, and it really paid off.
Wow. So I bet you guys are wondering about stories about Julia Roberts, and I know that Scott has a pretty good one, as well as discovery of Matt Damon and how he and that sort of thing. So that would be a good thing for you to share.
Sure. Well, the Matt Damon thing, it's funny because, we were shooting in Mystic, Connecticut, and so we were casting in New York and Boston. And, we were casting day player parts out of both places. And so there was an open casting call from actors in Boston to come down to Mystic and read, and for all the small parts and the day player parts and all of that. And, we had no idea, so apparently, Ben Affleck's mother drove Matt and Ben to the audition. And they were 15 and 16, or both 15, going on 16. And we cast Matt. But, Matt Damon wasn't Matt Damon back then. he was just, Matt Damon, little Matt Damon. So, years later, when we all kind of, when he started hitting it, we realized actually for a little while, somebody called me up and said, do you know who was in your movie? I heard, well, they said, go look on IMDb and see who's in your own cast. And I'm going down there and I'm seeing, this kid. It was like, Matt Damon was this kid. So, oh my God. And then about a year later, I was at the Sundance Film Festival. I had a movie that I produced that was in competition. And we had a party for it. And one of the actresses who was in that movie was dating, kind of dating for an hour and a half, Ben. And he came to our party. And it was just a party at a condo. It wasn't a big fancy party. But so, I introduced myself, and she, you produced Tristan's movie, that's great. And I said, I've got another thing I want to talk to you about. And I said, did you, he said, wait a minute. He goes, wait a minute. Did you produce Mystic Pizza? And I said, yeah, I wanted to talk to you about it. He goes, you son of a bitch. He said, my mother drove us down, and you cast Matt. And I'll never forgive you. I said, well, we cast a better actor. He was a good sport. But yeah, his mother actually drove them to the audition.
Wow. How about Julia Roberts?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So Julia was actually delightful to work with. And she was 19 going on 20 when we did Mystic Pizza. And besides having sort of blondish, brownish hair, and we decided to ask her, we asked her after she came in to do a rinse and do dark hair, which she kept for a while, which she liked. She liked that look for a long time, and she kept that look. She was mischievous. She wasn't a troublemaker, she was mischievous. And one day we were shooting a night scene at a golf course, and we were shooting like from 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the morning. And at lunch break, which was midnight, Julia and Lily Taylor, one of the guys, I forget who, just disappeared for 45 minutes. We couldn't find him. And they came back, and it was like they were like 5 minutes late. They weren't like an hour late. They were like 5 minutes late. And Julia, we noticed, was limping slightly. But, she didn't have a broken leg. She was just limping. And nobody said anything to her. We thought, well, that's a little strange. What was she doing? Nobody said anything to her. The next day, we got a call from the people on the golf course that we were shooting at in Rhode Island. And they said, we know you guys were shooting last night. When the grounds people got here in the morning, we noticed that there was a golf cart upside down in one of the sand traps. You guys know anything about that? And, at first it was like, no, not really. We'll look into it. And we started asking. Nobody would speak up. Finally, she didn't say it. Somebody else said something. And I went to the golf course and said, look, if there are any damages to the course or anything, we'll take care of it. But they had gone on a joyride during lunch, and we're like, as fast as you can go in a golf cart, but going down and hit a bump, of course, and went up in the air and just turned it over and dumped them, and she was dragged. One of the other actors told me he was dragging her down the course. So it actually could have been serious, except, she was resilient and only had a sprained ankle. But, those are the kinds of things she did. She never did anything more serious than that. She was actually great to work with and a lot of fun, but a troublemaker.
Why don't you share with everybody about how Mystic Pizza led to your producing Home Alone?
Sure. So when after I did Mystic Pizza, I really felt like I wanted to do a movie at a studio. I had done a lot of independent film, and the independent film business was different then than it is now. But I just felt it was time to move up into making a studio film and sort of put the word out with an agent and some other people to interview for studio movies rather than, and I was kind of, in that regard, I was a working producer. I also had been developing my own projects, which I do more of now in the last 20 years, but back then I was more of a producer for hire. So an agent got me an interview with, on a project that John Hughes was doing. And John Hughes was, at the top of his game and had recently done Ferris Bueller and Trains, Planes, and Automobiles, and had already done Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink and all of those movies. And the agent said, hey, there's a script that we want you to see. And so they sent me a script called Career Opportunities, if anybody's ever seen that film of John's. And I have to say, out of everything he's done, it's probably one of the lesser John Hughes. Let's just call it lesser John Hughes. It's not the best movie in the world, but it happens to everybody. But at that time, John had hit after hit after hit after hit. So I read the script, and it's these two kids who are stuck in like a Walmart, and two guys or people are coming to rob it. It turned out to be Frank Whaley and I think Jennifer Connelly, and they were roller skating around, and it really actually didn't make much sense to me. So I had a partner at the time, and we had worked really hard to get an interview for a studio movie, and he said, look, just you can express your opinion after we get the job. Okay, all right, I'll try to keep my mouth shut, because I was a little bit more opinionated, not obnoxiously, but I really, it mattered to me what it was about. And so we sit down and we meet John Hughes. We're at Universal, and it's the first time I had ever had a meeting in a studio. So all of that stuff that everybody else was used to about like going on the lot, getting the pass, parking, it was like, other than going on a tour, it was the first time I'd ever done that. And it was a little daunting and, just eye-opening, and all these people are walking around, dragging stuff around like you see, but when you're making independent films, you're not in those situations. You're just in the, in alleys and streets and 4 o'clock in the morning making movies. So John Hughes walks into the room, sits down, and he goes, nice to meet you. So he launched right into it. So what do you think of the script? And I was like breathing, like, oh no, what am I going to say? And my partner's already kicking me under the table. And he didn't want to talk. He didn't want me to talk, but my partner didn't want to say anything. And I said, it's okay, It's pretty good. Yeah, and John was a lot of things, but John was intuitive. And he said, yeah, I know it needs some work. Tell me what you really think. And that's when I said, it's okay, just like that. And he said, you guys will get into it, work with the director, make it better. I know it needs to be better. And, that's what I want you to do. And he left. But then about 3 days later, somebody who worked for him called and said, well, we're giving the job to somebody else. So my partner said, yeah, you shouldn't have opened your mouth. You shouldn't have told John Hughes. You couldn't, he knew you didn't like the script. Like, you're telling John Hughes his script stinks, And I said, there's nothing to, what are you going to do? I looked him in the eye. I knew he wanted an answer. And I knew most people were sycophantic around John. That was one of the problems John had, was that people just, said what they thought John wanted to hear all the time. It happened all the time with John. I talked to people who worked with him. Everybody told me all this stuff. So they said, just tell them the truth. And so I did. And so somebody else got the job. So, 3 weeks go by, nothing's happening. I started to get a little depressed. I started to think, God, maybe you're right. Maybe I should have kept my opinion to myself until after I got the job. And, and that's a different way of approaching being a filmmaker. And I didn't know. I started to doubt myself. And I came home one day, and at the door of my apartment in LA was an envelope with a script. And again, with independent filmmaking, nobody messengers anything around. Nobody has that kind of money. You know, there was like a messenger. It was from a messenger, and I got close to the envelope, and on the envelope was a Warner Brothers sticker, and I was like, maybe they meant to deliver it next door, you know. And I opened up the envelope, and there was a letter from the guy at Warner Brothers that said, John Hughes wanted you to read this script, and after you read it, call me and we'll meet and we'll talk about it. And I started reading the script. It didn't have a title page for a variety of reasons. And so I didn't know the name of it. I started reading the script, and it was Home Alone. And I was like, this is a little different than Career Opportunities. It was like the scales of justice, you know. It was like Career Opportunities, Home Alone, Career Opportunities, Home Alone. And I read 30 pages, and it was like, it was night and day of kind of, obviously, a commercial movie and something that I thought, I mean, we didn't know it was going to be that big, but it was definitely something that was much more interesting. So went to meet John, and he was in Chicago. He had his company in Chicago with the director who was there, who they wouldn't tell me who the director was for reasons unknown to this day. But it turned out the director was Chris Columbus, who I knew, who had also gone to NYU a few years after me, around the time Dana went. And we knew each other, but they wouldn't.
Before me.
Yeah, but they wouldn't tell anybody. And I was like, Chris, hey, what are you doing here? Oh, I'm going to direct this movie. And we had dinner, and we talked about it, and John was great. And so afterwards, I go back to my hotel room, and these are the days of sort of pre-mobile phones, although people like John Hughes had them when nobody else did. He had the one that was sort of hooked into your car. It was like, you know, in the car, and he's calling from his car. He had dropped Chris off, and he's calling me in my room, and he said, I'm really glad about this, because I knew when you read Career Opportunities that wasn't the right project for you, that I had to find something better for you. And that's this movie, so I'm really glad you're doing this instead of Career Opportunities. And I, you know, to this day, I think about that, and often when I'm speaking or doing stuff at colleges and, you know, film schools, I talk about it because it's sort of, you know, you have to fight for and speak about what you love and what you want to do. You don't have to be obnoxious. There are plenty of obnoxious people in the film business. But if you believe in something, there's a way to convey that, to get your point across. And ultimately, I guess I got my point across, and I was, you know, rewarded with Home Alone instead of Career Opportunities.
Working with him, and what was the setup in terms of you know, how you got it to work?
Yeah, well, he was 9 years old, so he had done a couple movies. He had done Uncle Buck with John recently. Right before that, I think that was the movie they did together. And he had done another movie. The director was Dan Petrie. Yes, which was a really lovely movie that he was in, and that was pretty much it. So he was known a little bit, but not a star. You know, he was a good kid actor, and you know, John suggested him, and we brought him in, and then we looked at a lot of other kids just in case. And in the meantime, I had to get to know his family and all of that, and people know all about the story about Macaulay Culkin and his family and emancipating himself later. And there were issues with the family, and so much so that when we hired him and we shot in Chicago, when you're shooting a movie with a minor, you not only have to abide by the rules of SAG, but you also have to abide by the rules of the state that you're in terms of child labor laws. So I actually went to court in Chicago, in the state of Illinois, because he was a minor, in order to, you know, get his work permit. And what I discovered at that hearing was they had done research about his family and his father already, and they for the movie, I became Macaulay's guardian. So I remember coming home from that day and going, you know, I was married at the time, somebody different than now. But I came home, my wife's like, oh, what happened today? Oh, we have a kid, you know. Well, for the next 3 months, we have a kid. And I was Macaulay's legal guardian during the shooting of the movie because they just unfortunately couldn't rely on his father to be there all the time. Even though he was there, he would disappear and do all sorts of things. So that was interesting. He was good though. I mean, he was fun. He was intuitive. You know, I mean, he's obviously very different now, and it looks like lately he seems in really good shape finally. But yeah, he was a great. At 9, he was great. And you know, it was not a great situation. They lived in a like a 5th floor walk up on the upper west side, and it was not a good situation with a bunch of kids in like a 2-bedroom apartment. But you know, he came out of that, and at least now he seems to be coming out of it.
It's interesting talking about the theme of fathers and sons and how that. I think that's a good segue to talking about the smoke signals, which they just published. I encourage you guys to watch the rest of the movie. And another point, if you haven't seen it already, it was directed by Chris Year, who came out. He was 2 years ahead of me at NYU. Scott, I want you to talk about how personal a film it was and why so. I think that's a good way for us to end, and then afterwards we'll open up to the audience and you guys can do Q&A.
I think Smoke Signals is probably my favorite film. It has a lot of personal resonance and being about fathers and sons, and I had been living in LA for a long time at that time, and I decided I wanted to kind of change my life a little bit, keep working in the business, but I had bought a home up in the Seattle area and ended up moving to Seattle for a period of time. And when I got to Seattle, I was still doing what I was doing, just remote from LA, but I started to look around for different things that were, endemic to the Northwest. And after a little bit of time, I found Sherman Alexie's writing. He had this book of short stories called The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven, which is what Smoke Signals was taken from, with Thomas and Victor and some of the other characters on the reservation. And I started a relationship with Sherman, who at the time was not living in Seattle where he lives now, but he was living out in Spokane, not on a reservation, but in Spokane. And we started talking about movies, and he said, I've been writing books and poetry and short stories, but I really would love to make a movie someday. So I started sending him screenplays to read and other things, and we started a friendship, and then he moved to Seattle. And he ultimately, brought me the script of Smoke Signals that he had written, which, when I read it, I always say when you read a really, really good screenplay, and you make a movie from a really good screenplay, putting aside movies that are commercial and successful, it's really hard to go back to things that aren't like that. And it was like a drug, like, oh my God, this is the best thing. I'm never going to find this again. How do I find a script like this again? And but Sherman also was a great worker. There's a whole scene in the movie, which you see in the first scene, about the fire, which sets up the movie. There had been this fire and when the father, if anybody's seen the movie, when the father says, who caught Thomas, who's the other boy, not his son, and his grandmother says something to him, and he says, I didn't mean to. There's a whole context for that, because what he's really talking about isn't catching the kid. He's talking about what he ultimately did, which was something that Sherman couldn't figure out, was that he had set this fire, which is why he left the reservation, couldn't live around the people. He had clearly been responsible for killing Thomas's parents and setting this fire. And then when he's saying, I don't mean to, he was talking about setting the fire, which nobody really knew until we flashed back and realized that he had set the fire. But in writing the script, I kept saying to Sherman, it's not there, it's not there, it's not there. And he would like slam the phone down and then pick it up. Then he'd call me the next morning and say, I had a dream, and I think I dreamed what this should be. And then finally, after weeks and weeks and weeks, and it seems really simple in the screenplay of the movie now, that Victor's father set this fire, but he finally said to me, my God, he set the fire. And he like slammed on the phone again, rewrote the script, had it all wired beautifully, and then we were ready to shoot the film. It was, making a film with the Native American community up in the Northwest was very rewarding, and we all became, it was probably, a lot of films you sort of create a family, a lot of theater you create a family, but I'd have to say the family that was created on Smoke Signals exists to this day. And for me personally, at the end, when the movie was done, we sold the film to Miramax, which was a very good sale. It went to Sundance, and we were at Sundance, and all the screenings were going well. And the word was, the festival never tells you they think you're going to win something, but they tell you if you were not planning to be here for the award ceremony, maybe you ought to think about that. So they started telling us that about 3-4 days before the award ceremony. The only problem was, for me, right at that moment, my father, who was in Pennsylvania, had a heart attack. And my brother called and he said he was going to have bypass surgery. He said, I really think you should come back, which of course I would. So I got on a plane, and as I was flying, he died, unfortunately. And the next day, we won 2 out of the 3 top awards at Sundance, and my partners were all there, and I was, back in Pennsylvania arranging a funeral, which had a lot to do with the movie and fathers and sons. So I think every time, most of the movies I've made, I don't mind watching them. Sometimes, a lot of people say they have a hard time watching things they've done. But with Smoke Signals, there's just something that just connects with me. Every time I see scenes from the film, it's really hard because of that situation. But it really, I think there's something that it captured, and the movie captured, that I don't think anything else I've done has captured. And that's that, really that bond and that relationship between Victor and his father and the ashes, and doing all that stuff in the end of the movie when they're spreading the ashes over the Spokane River. And it's just a very, very, very emotional film. And it continues to resonate for me because of what happened to my father.
Well, unfortunately, I've been told that we are somewhat behind schedule and that there are other films that are still lined up for this evening. So we're going to have to, I hate to do this, but we're going to have to limit it to one question. Okay, first person to raise your hand. But wait, I just want to say that if you have other questions for Scott, I'm sure that after this you'll be able to answer them for people. Okay, so not all is not lost. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask that you were talking about the difference between independent films and commercial films. And there are lots of really good films and lots of films that make a ton of money, but Teen Wolf, Mystic Pizza, and Home Alone are cultural touchstones, pop culture touchstones. And I'm wondering what it is when you're reading one of these scripts that keys you in, whether consciously or not, that this is something more than a really successful movie, that this is, Home Alone.
Well, the question is, for people who didn't hear it, is, basically, what is the thing with movies like Teen Wolf or Home Alone or Mystic Pizza, and for me, Smoke Signals, where you get this feeling like it's something more than just a commercial movie, that if it becomes a touchstone of, a social touchstone or something. on one level, I'd have to say, I'm not sure, but I have a feeling, there's a feeling I get when I read them. You know, it's like, I played baseball when I was younger, and I was good. And there are people who can coach, like there's people who can take a kid and do a batting stance or show them how to swing a bat, but they used to ask, especially two people, Hank Aaron and Willie Mays, about why they never coached. Two of the best hitters in the history of baseball. And both of them have said, I don't know that I can explain exactly what it is that I did. So there's something that I think for me, what I love is something that has a universal feel, that has some cultural significance, which is where Smoke Signals and Mystic Pizza come into play. Home Alone's kind of different, but so there's something interesting culturally of, oh wow, Native American culture, we haven't seen that, and we certainly haven't seen it like this. Or the Portuguese community in Mystic, Connecticut, or in that area. Like, at the same time, the movie ultimately is humanistic, and it's really, we're different, but we're really all the same. And I think mostly for me, those movies, I look for that, or when I feel it, I know it's there, and it captures me, and I know this is something I really want to make or do, or in the case of what I'm doing now a lot, write, because I'm writing and doing some other things. So that's important to me, that it's unique, a unique cultural experience, but it becomes a universal experience for everybody. And you know, look, Home Alone, I mean, I'm not even sure I can explain it, you know. It came after the first Gulf War. I think people wanted to go to the movie theater and enjoy themselves. That's not to say there's anything wrong with the movie, but I mean, you know, there's things about the movie that maybe in a different era, somebody might have, as every now and then on the internet, somebody says, why didn't we call the police, right? And if it was done last week, and everybody has a cell phone, and kids have cell phones, they probably should have called the police, right? But, you know, it was at a time. And I think we also spent a lot of time. The one thing that was not in John's script was the relationship with the neighbor. You know, maybe a little bit corny, but it turned out to be this whole thing with Macaulay and this older man, where Macaulay was the one who in the church and everything got him to reach out to speak to his son, who he hadn't talked to in years. And at that last scene, when the family's coming to see him, it's because, and that wasn't in the original screenplay. So we sort of looked to find something emotional to bind the story so it was more than just a funny comedy. So I think I always try to find something human to get into a story and make sure that it connects with people, that it connects with all people, and people of all ages, or as much as possible.
So we have here, Audrey is the chair of the Ridgewood Arts Council, which I'm a member, and so as this is a partnership with the Guild, Audrey has something to present to Scott. And let me just say before she does, when you exit theater, please join our mailing list. This will include the Arts Council updates on future artist talks, as well as updates on the project, A Case of Blue, which we're producing this summer. So I hope you'll do that, and here is Audrey.
Thank you, Dana. Scott, we're so thankful to have you here today to join us and share your insights in filmmaking. So on behalf of the Ridgewood Arts Council and the Village of Ridgewood, this is signed by the mayor of the Village of Ridgewood, who unfortunately can't be here today, but what it says is, Certificate of Appreciation presented to Scott Rosenfelt in recognition of your participation in the Ridgewood Arts Council's Artist Talks and for encouraging, supporting, and fostering art within the Village of Ridgewood. Thank you very much.
Thank you.